Three, two.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special guest, Dr. Holt. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Oh, excellent. I don't know why lately, like it's like 4 seasons, and I have to like think through the intro more. I don't know why. You think it's like it would be the easiest thing, but it's like,
Well, you said very special guest, so I'm still on that. That's lovely. I like that.
yeah, it's crazy because I'm just like I say the same thing generally,
But
but like
it feels good.
yeah. But I'm like you. Before that, it's always like I know everybody's name. It's super weird. So it must be like a thing I've done to myself. But I'm really glad to have you on today. I was really happy to get your email. I get so many emails, so it's been so hard, which has been nice. It's been a great, problem, as all my friends say. I'm like, no, I like it, because then I don't have to go out fishing for people all the time. And I was so happy to get your email. And I remember I always do, I star it so I make sure I go back to it. And I went back a couple hours later after I was done with school, and I saw your cover, and I was like, yep. So,
I appreciate it.
yeah, I was like, yeah, this is my thing. I didn't even have to really look at the blurb. I was like, I could already tell. And then when I went to the blurb, I'm like, yeah, this is gonna be a really cool book. So happy that we talked and chatted and can get you on. Thank you so much for sending me the book and everything as well. I absolutely loved everything inside. I actually we're unveiling my novella a little bit differently, even in physical locations based off of the book mail that you sent me. So I just want to point that out to people that I will be having that video a couple of days after this releases. So we'll release on a Saturday. It'll be Thursday this week. So everything will be right down in the description. If you're new here, you can find all of DR's social links, book links, everything down below. You can find everything that I have, but also the book mail that he sent me as well. You can actually see how cool of a package you sent me, which is really neat. So I'm really excited to share that with people. So thank you so much for doing that and coming on. And I really can't wait to pick your writer brain today. So
no problem. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Thank you.
For sure. And like I said before we got recording, I was so excited that I privately shared, your book cover and the blurb, and some people are like, "Oh, I'm buying that." So I was really happy that we could already get that going. So if everybody else wants to do that right now, feel free to pause the video and audio and come back, and we'll finish up. But we'll start right there, my friend, with that first question. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
Yeah, I think the first time I remember writing something, I must have been maybe about 10. I'm 45 years old now, so I must have been like 10 years old. And it was about a professor. I can't remember. It was something called this professor who traveled through time. But all I remember is, yeah, all I remember already you sold it.
Yeah.
All I remember is writing it. But the teacher at the time took my mum into the school because he didn't believe I wrote it, and that hurt me because because I kept myself to myself. But when it comes to my sci-fi, I was so, you know what it's like. I was so in love with it that it was kind of my own little thing. So when I had time to express that for the first time, I did it in this massive story, and this teacher was like, and that sort of knocked me back. And then ever since then, I've written, I've done like short stories, but only for myself on my computer. Then when I knew I wanted to write wasn't project preservation at the time, but when I knew I wanted to write this story, I actually wrote like an autobiography of my own life, which is boring, nothing exciting to it. But I wanted to get the feel of writing and editing. Do you know what I mean? So I actually wrote that over like 8 months, my whole life. I'm never going to do anything with it, just to get the feel of writing. And then off the back of that, over about, I want to say 8 or 9 years, actually, in my head, I started building what would eventually become project preservation. So it's my debut novel, so I don't have that much writing experience, but I've always wanted to do it, and I've been building it for a while, project preservation. So.
Now, I just want to pause real quick because this actually came up with James Logan and I recently with our interview. He made a good point when I said something similar to that. And he said, like he took just about, I would say, probably similar time frame to what you're saying for his first novel, The Silver Blood Promise. And he made a good point that I just want to talk about real quick, was that, when you're talking about writing experience, right? It's taken me 14 years to write one novel, like just this one idea. And it's changed. It went from a short story to novella. And then I still don't think I'm quite there yet. It's on my third draft. It's going to need like probably 7 or 8, but like eventually it's going to be really good. But I've already gotten 3 drafts done for that one novel. Right. And I don't think he made a good point that I don't think we give ourselves enough credit, like even though you don't have that much work out, it's still a lot of work to just get that, that one novel, you know what I mean? And I think that's why, you have a lot of people that are on Amazon or, release books, but still, like, you go up to the, somebody in the street and say, hey, have you written a book and released it? A lot of people haven't even written a book, let alone, and I'm not saying that to be crass or anything, it's just facts, right? And then a lot of people haven't even, like published it on Amazon or anything, right? Or had somebody else read it. So I think the fact that, you did that alone, right, is a really big accomplishment. I just want to point that out to our audience too, because I think we're so used to talking to each other, you know what I mean? That we're so used to talking to each other or talking to, like, I talked to authors that recently have written 54 books, So for me, it feels like I haven't really written anything, but they keep trying to remind me, like, hey, the only way I got to 54 was by doing 14 rounds or 14 years of edits on one book. So I just wanted to point that out because I think that is really, really important, right? So, yeah. I know, right? I'm like,
wow.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel so underprepared for this interview. When we first spoke, you said about all the history that you studied and politics. I'm like, oh my god. Now you've written 54 books. I'm like, oh my god, I've only written.
Oh, not me. No, not me. I have like 15 half books and like one. But I mean, that's what I'm saying, right? Like, like one of my guests, I was like, you really? I didn't realize that. They're like, I have ghost, writing experience too. I'm like, oh my God, So I was thinking like 18, and they're like, no, I've written like 54 books, including my own stuff. I'm like, that is so much. But they made such a good point, and I'm like, no, it's a good point. It's a valid point. Like G.D. Penman and I were talking about that 2 seasons ago. It's like, we just don't give ourselves enough credit for the amount of times, the fact that you finished this book, and it's a great product and people are going to read it. Like, I'm really excited to read it. I can tell it's going to be like my type of thing. So I think that is such a huge accomplishment. But indie authors in particular, we tend to not think that way, right? We tend to think differently.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I just want to just mention it to people, right? Like some other people, that you would, but I thought it was interesting. One of my friends, she's like, I would have never gotten to, whatever. I think she's up to like 38. She goes, I never would have gotten there without thinking about each book differently and how much I actually accomplished. Because I'm like struggling to finish like 2 novellas right now. And she made such a good point. So I just wanted to point that out again. That seems to be like the theme.
Can I say one thing on that as well? Yeah. My thing is, like, what I wanted to do, I wanted to write this book, and then I wanted to get another book going. I kind of wanted to do almost like 2, maybe 3 sort of books a year, and not make money off it, but just make a little, just a little kind of little. I want get a regular audience who know my work.
Yeah.
But I've realised, that I really like project preservation it's like a massive world with many characters. And I realized I actually enjoy that. But the only problem is, in writing like that, it takes a long time. It takes a long time to form it. So it's like, I sometimes think, I don't know if I'm ever going to write another book because it took so long to get to this one. Do you know what I mean?
No, I do. Yeah. But you also make a good point too, that, each of us writes so many different things, right? So like I have a couple novellas. I have a prequel trilogy, just have to get out there. And I just recently figured out, finally, it was like I found an article, if that makes sense, for my main character for my urban fantasy, and I have like a whole universe. But like I was struggling. I wanted to do something with like the Wild Hunt, right? And with him, and I couldn't figure it out. And I happened to read an article, and then I looked up a song, like this Celtic band, and all of a sudden the title came in, and it just happened that it fit with the Wild Hunt. And then I found this old story that a lot of people probably have not heard that relates to the Wild Hunt. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. And all of a sudden, my book 1 fit really well with my prequel novella trilogy. I set 2 years in like apart, so I can do as many prequel, novellas as I want, or books or whatever. But like it fit perfectly. Now, I tried writing just that outline or basic idea like 6 or 7 times and got probably 5,000, 10,000 words in. And I'm like, it's just not working, right? I think it just wasn't the time, if that makes sense. And it was like weird how in one night I already got, I think like 11 chapters outlined, like beginning outline, but it's like I have the thoughts now. So I just think like, even in terms of the different, what people write, like I talked to a couple people that do epic fantasy, right? They're like, I love epic fantasy, but I'm only getting 3 books out when somebody else, even indie, right, is getting out all
Yeah,
these.
that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that, again, whatever it is you want to write, I think that's important. I love novellas. People are like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, they're cheaper, quicker, and easier for me to finish right now in my life. I just think,
Yeah.
I want to
I
grow
get
my
that.
audience. I want to grow my audience. I have authors all the time like, "Hey, can I read your stuff? Hey, can I help you promote your stuff?" I'm like, I need to get some stuff out there. So why am I worried about a novel like everybody else, right? Who always does that? I was like, let's just get some novellas out there. I can get more out there, do my own anthologies, gives me time and hopefully some money back, right, with Kickstarters and stuff to then do other stuff I want to do. But I think that each of us, again, is at our own pace. I talk to my students about this all the time. But I think it's so different with writers, right? Is because like you want to write that book or that type of book. I want to do something else. And I think it's so hard for us because, that's why I do this podcast, because I think it's good to build off each other's successes, because we each, even though we're doing the same thing, we're going about it completely differently. That's advertising, writing, everything. So I don't think there's anything wrong with, spending 14 years on a book, particularly if it's done and it's, it's a product that you're really proud of, and if people enjoy in reading it, To Kill a Mockingbird, you know what I mean? It's like gotta be one of the greatest books I've ever read, and then it took a long time for Harper Lee to get a sequel, right? And I don't know, I think each of us, my friend always used to say, whatever's your journey. And I'm like, I think for writers in particular, for indie, that makes total sense. Like whatever's your journey, So I think it's a good point to make. But yeah, it's cool. I always love talking to people about their writing journey because we always get something new out of it. It's been 4 seasons, and I always get a different answer and learn some sort of different perspective from it. So it's cool. Which leads us right into actually question 2. What genre or genres do you currently write in and why?
Sci-fi, sci-fi, and sci-fi, sci-fi, and sci-fi. That's it. I'm all sci-fi. It's all I've loved since a little kid. First book I ever read was Contact by Carl Sagan.
Oh man, it's a good book.
Yeah, that completely just blew my world. Blew my world. I love everything about it. I love the freedom. You can even put elements of fantasy in your sci-fi, and it will still be sci-fi, but it's got that fantasy taste to it. I just love the genre. I'm quite tropey. I'm comfortable with my sci-fi trope. I'm not ashamed of them. I like it. I always see it as like, if I get a sci-fi trope, it's kind of like I know I'm going to enjoy it because that's what I want. So if I get first contact novel, I want people looking up at the sky. I want them arriving. I want people running around. I want the news station talking about all those things which some people will be like, oh God. But I like that because that's what I enjoy. I don't want anything which I'm not going to know what's going on. Give me what I know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and that's what I enjoy. So yeah, I love my sci-fi. I like fantasy. I mean, I like some of it, but yeah, it will always be sci-fi what I write in. That's my passion.
That's awesome. For me, like sci-fi was my first love. Star Wars was my first love. I will never ever have another first love. And
that's it. There we go.
Yeah, like even like Alien, Predator. I mean, and that's like I was talking to somebody, and when I was in middle school, I would just read those big Star Wars books. But my teacher was so great, and I think that's why I wanted to become a teacher. Partly was like she would be like, "Yeah, you want to read that? That's fine." I read The Giver in like a day. So she's like, yeah, and I knew it all, and everybody else was taking time to read The Giver, and I was like, can I like test out and read a Star Wars book? She's like, yeah, sure. And then that poor woman had to listen to me all of 7th grade because you had to like be able to tell her like 3 questions. So that poor lady, like she learned so much about Star Wars from me, probably more than George Lucas knew himself, because of the assessments that we had to do. And then I got bored and I was reading The Giver for like a second time. But yeah, it's like sci-fi, like you said, there's a lot of different shades to it. And I think that indie for me has been so much fun to discover sci-fi because you just get so many different varieties and you just get such a wide breadth. And I have to say, I went to fantasy for a while because I was kind of over traditional sci-fi. Then I was in traditional fantasy for a while because I hadn't been there before in middle school, high school, college. And then I started to get into indie sci-fi and then indie fantasy. And now I just can't ever not.
You have a preference?
Yeah, there's just been so much, like Ness Brown, her novella, I don't know why I'm blanking on it. It's kind of like an alien thing. And it was I literally read that, her newest one, like I read that within like a night. I mean, it was an absolutely amazing book. And and it had, like you said, right, it had those great sci-fi tropes to it. And I was like, I was there for it. like the Murderbot series. Like I'm like, yes, like give me this, you know, android like person that's trying to figure out life and what it means to be human, and let's have some violence around
That's
there.
right. Love it.
Yeah. That's so great. Well, you said
Do you have a preference? Do you have a preference from fantasy or sci-fi?
Ooh, that's really hard. I think I read more fantasy today than I do sci-fi, just because I read sci-fi for so long. If that, like, I used to read like the Star Trek books, Sequest books, like you name it. You know what I mean? Like I read Indiana Jones, which is a little bit of both, right? I mean, there was just so many different things that I read that were in the sci-fi genre. Like I would say even like a little bit of both, right? Like even like read the X-Men books, the Spider-Man books, like way back in the day, right? Like the novelizations and stuff of like the Batman movies, you know, stuff like that. So I consider all that sci-fi. Yeah, so I had a great time, but now I just kind of bounce back and forth. For a while, I got go through little spurts. So I was on such a sci-fi kick last year because I was in like Pierce Brown. I met him years ago. I was like, it's about time to read Red Rising, and I read that, and then I was just like read Ness Brown. I was just on a kick, and then now I've just been like bouncing back.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been hard for me to pick,
Okay.
honestly. I just found so many good people, but yeah, it's like picking a favorite child. But you mentioned First Contact, but I'm curious were there some other ones in particular that, you know, like really got you into the genre?
Not see. I actually read more sort of non-fiction and fiction.
Oh, okay.
So I was heavily into my comics. Yeah, actually more non-fiction than fiction. I was heavily into my comics. Like I said, I read First Contact by Carl Sagan was the first one I read. I used to go to not sure if what you call them over in America. Do you know what a car boot sale is? Like a yard sale sort of thing. Maybe you call it a yard sale.
Yeah. We have like different terms for it. Yeah, garage sale, yard sale. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So I used to get the old dusty sci-fi books that were yellow. I got some Peter F. Hamilton books. Some of them, the reality dysfunction. Yeah. So I used to read some of them, but then I kind of almost like how you said, I didn't drift away from it. Then I got into my sort of like social politics, read a lot of Black history stuff, and I read that continuously for like 10, 15 years. Really, I got like about 1,000 books on all of that, as we were talking about before. And now, when I started thinking, like I said, that 10-year period about writing my own book, then I thought, right, let me see what I've essentially missed over the last 10 years, what the indie scene's like. So I read a couple of indie books, but I definitely read more non-fiction and fiction. But to be honest, when I was writing the book, I almost didn't want to read anything because I didn't want anything to sort of distract me and think, oh God, my writing's not good enough, or maybe I should put that idea. And I thought, let me just keep it clean. Do you know what I mean?
No, yeah, for sure. I think that's my problem lately is I've been so busy is like I've actually been going into my fantasy novella that I've been fixing series because I'm been reading some more urban fantasy just to like keep reading for the year, if that makes sense, because I'm getting burnt out with everything. So yeah, I totally get it because I'm like I like almost like, but it stinks because I have to get my 5th draft done to get to beta readers. So I'm like at that point where I have to like get through the 8th Harry Dresden book just so I can then do a palate cleanser just so I can get back to writing again with urban fantasy. So I get it. You don't want to sound too much like a person or do too much like that thing, I think, in that genre too. I tend to kind of do that, I think, sometimes, consciously. So yeah, I totally get that. Yeah. But that's cool though that you have a lot of nonfiction in there too, and just different things rather than sci-fi. So I think that's cool because I don't know, personally, I think that's where some of your ideas, have come from. To me, that seem really unique and really
preservation. Cool.
100%. Yeah. So I think that has definitely helped you. So again, I think that really goes to show that writers just need to figure out what works for them, right? So sometimes I am on a kick and I need fantasy to keep me writing fantasy. Like I'll be playing D&D, watch Vox Machina, or the D&D movie, the newest one, just to like stay in the mood, if that makes sense. And other times I don't even want to touch it. Yeah. So I'm like a moody writer, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I just have to figure it out, I guess. But that's super cool. Well, that's awesome. That sounds really awesome. So this is my absolute favorite question to ask any author and creator, because I love talking about really what brings you here and talking about your products in particular. So what is your book project preservation about, and how did you come up with this idea?
Right, here we go.
The good
Right,
stuff.
so initially, yeah, the good stuff, the good stuff. Initially, it started off with I had this image of this woman, this black woman with this attractive black woman with this afro, and she was in a laboratory working on a android head, and that's all that I kind of saw. That's where it all started. I like the idea of her working on it. That's it, and then from there, essentially project preservation was sort of built around that whole initial idea. That's literally just where it started, just that image. She, Nay, is the main character. She was originally going to be a side character, and then she became the main character. Yeah, she became the main character. So essentially, the story, it's a single mum surviving in the middle of a religious war, and she is with her newborn child, and her main goal, all she wants to do is find her best friend. She lost her best friend in the middle of the crowds when all the chaos is happening, the bombs are exploding, it's all going off. All she wants to do is find her best friend. Everything that she knows has been wiped out. She's essentially, on the blurb on the back, I say she's standing in the flame. She's essentially in the middle of this, standing around with her child. She just wants to find her best friend. Her best friend is look like a sister to her. But as the story goes on, she discovers that she's got emerging powers, is the best way to put it. And the people of her world look to her as a savior of sorts. She completely rejects that idea. She doesn't want to get involved in it. She doesn't want to be a savior. She doesn't want to be this prophesized, person to come and stop this invasion. She doesn't want it. All she wants to do is protect her child and find her best friend. Now, the person who prophesies her to be a savior is a prophet himself, and he's in control of 5 billion people on the planet. He started off as a preacher, just preaching to like a small flock, and eventually his word spread so much, people listened to his word, his passion, that he had religious control of these of this massive branch of people. And he, in there, prophesied that this prophet would come, and this prophet would be a fake prophet. That is who Nay is. She is the prophet who he's against. Yet for her, she just wants to find a friend. All this prophet stuff, you're the prophet. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I'm trying to protect my child. Please save us. You've clearly got powers. They're not powers. They're a disease. I don't want them. I just want to save my child. And that is that's the push and pull, the internal sort of struggle that she has to deal with. Like there's parts in the book where something's happening where a normal hero would obviously go and help. She'll turn away from it. She doesn't want to see it. People will see her running away saying, why aren't you helping us? She doesn't want to get involved in it. One, because she wants to protect her child. Two, she doesn't want that responsibility. And that is that's the essential back and forward of the book. And then obviously there's another massive element as well. But that's the essential story of it.
So I think that's crazy because I think about that all the time. I'm a martial artist, and something will happen.
You're martial artist as well. Oh my god.
Yeah. Well, I see people do something or whatever, and I'm like, oh yeah, I would do. People ask me, what would you do if I do this and that? They're like, oh, and I'm at the store yesterday, right? And somebody or this was a couple days ago, and somebody was like, well, this is like this happened me a couple, probably 10, 11 months ago, almost a year ago, where somebody came up to my car and was like trying to come up to talk to me. Well, I'm putting my son in the car, right? For instance, this time. And I'm a very nice individual, but when it's like getting dark and I don't know who you are and you're getting closer to my car, I'm like, I don't want you to come near my car. I want you to stay there and tell me what you want. And they were like, oh, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay. I'm like, no offense. They just kept walking. I said, can you please just give me a minute? I go, let me get my kid in the car. In my head, my alarms are going off, and all these things. And I'm checking to see if someone else is around. Finally, I was had to get a little bit more forceful. I said, please do not come any closer. I am putting my kid in this car, and then I'll answer your question. And it was a reasonable question, but they just kept walking up on me. So, it got to that point where now I go to that parking lot, and they finally stopped. I was able to get him in the car. I locked the car, and I turned, and they're about 10 feet, about 8 feet away. And they're like, yeah, da, 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 da. And I could tell, you know, something was a little up. And I'm like, okay, well, you can go down this way. And I gave them directions and they left. It was really cool. And I got in my car, drove off. But I can't help but think about that,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
every time I go. So that was like
That's
almost a year ago. So when I read your blurb, I can't help it every time. Like I went to that Walmart twice yesterday. You know what I mean? In the morning and at night, I had to for my family because it's nearest and it's the middle of the day. But I can't help but think about that. What would I do if I had my kid and I know what I would do without him every time? Well,
exactly that. Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
and it changes my perspective because people ask me, I'm like, I would run away. You know, I'm like, I would just take him and go. So when I read your blurb, I'm like, man, I was feeling that because that literally was my experience. But you know, it turned out well, but it's like it constantly goes through my mind now. You know, if we're somewhere, it's like it's a totally different mindset than I've ever had before as like a self-defense instructor, martial artist, whatever. So it's interesting.
I wanted to approach because she has superhero powers, but I don't call it that because she's not acting that kind of way. And the powers don't really emerge until towards the second half, maybe the last quarter of the book. And I was a bit hesitant about that. I wanted to see what the beta readers thought because I thought a lot of people would pick it up and they essentially wanted like a black superwoman from page one. But that's not the story. It's exactly as you said. There's one scene in the book where she's walking through, it's kind of like a village, and she can see these, they call themselves beings from heaven. She can see these angels that are attacking these people. And she's standing there and a little kid sees her from between two huts. And he sees her hands are glowing. She's got some kind of power. But she sees these people getting killed. But then she thinks she's got her son on her back. And this boy's saying, please help us. And she just turns away, walks off, and looks back, and the boy's looking at her, and that moment sticks with her. And there's several parts throughout the book where she has to deal with that, whether she wants to embrace this, you know, go around sort of flying around the planet saving people, or just find her friend, protect her son, put over a hood and hide away. And it even comes to the point where the attackers, the invaders, start saying, well, we've heard about this prophet or this savior. Where is this savior? Why isn't this savior helping you? And I thought it was an interesting dynamic to write that. And it was quite difficult writing it because I'm thinking, you should be saving these people. You've got this power. But then Nay wouldn't do that. So I'm not writing what I would do. I want to do what she would do. And it was a bit funny how beta readers would take it. But luckily, that element, none of them brought, there's other stuff which they brought up and thought, you need to change that. Oh, okay. But that particular part, as in, it's not Supergirl from page one. I thought that people might not like that. Nobody's actually sort of said, you know, raised that as an issue. They've enjoyed the story, so to speak.
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm trying to say?
No, I do. And I just keep thinking of the new, I haven't really watched it too much, but I see clips, you know, like the new Superman, like the newest on the CW, the newest Superman TV show, because they do a lot of Superman stuff, but they're going more with the Clark Kent stories, you know, and he's got issues more from a Clark Kent standpoint. Well, I think that's what the Lois and Clark TV show back in, you know, with Dean Cain and stuff, and Terry Hatcher, I think that's what it did really well. Is like 50 minutes out of the hour would be him being Clark Kent and the problems Clark Kent had. He would go off and fly and do something and be Superman because it was a Superman TV show, but really it was about Lois and Clark. And they added, I think this new show, from what my friend is saying, from what I've seen on the clips, is like they've added a lot of things where like Lois is like, they have kids now, right? And she's like, I want you to be home helping me with the kids and not flying off all the time. So I just thought it was interesting that you said that, because it really makes me think of that, right? Because that's more interesting, right? You're thinking like, oh, Lois isn't going to be okay with them flying off all the time.
I think so.
It's a totally different dynamic, which I think makes the show now more interesting and makes him a more interesting character now. Same with Batman, right? With Damian Wayne. As soon as you bring in Damian Wayne, it's like, you know, he's the Robin now. It's different than Dick Grayson or somebody else, I think, right? Even though he sees them as his own kids, it's like, that is your blood. So it is a little bit different. So I think that was really smart on your part. I would kind of find personally, like, glad your beta readers were good about that. If I were them, I'd be like, yeah, I wouldn't want a Supergirl-esque from start one, even if she had a kid, because I would find that a little bit more boring. So I think that this, to me, sounds like a much more interesting story. So
it's kind of difficult because I'm kind of like a term over like crash bang wallop, as in I like action. I like my cheesy Marvel. I like my action from bam, smash. That's what I like. So to not do that was quite. I had to pull myself back. Like I could have had her having I could have had her having her powers from day one because she's got some awesome. I'm going to be biased, but she's got some awesome powers. But they don't really get. Some of them she uses like once throughout the book, right towards the end, and that was difficult to think. Should I put more in? But I thought, you know what, I'm going to stick with that, and I don't give anything away, but you can see the potential that's there. Because with project preservation, it's all contained in one. I was very specific about that. I didn't want to do the whole thing. So the reason it's a larger book is because you've got her origin, then you've got her middle bit, then you've got her growth, then you've got her, then you've got her powers, then you've got her use, which would be individual books, but her entire story is within there, and then that's a self-contained thing. So yeah, so far people like it. The reviews are really good, so I'm happy.
I think that's really cool. I think it's smart on your part too, letting the character decide. I have like a D&D party type story that I'm writing. Yeah, like, and I totally get what you're saying, because I'm the type of person where I'm more of a paladin. I have like my paladin cup, right? And not that I'm like, I don't know. But like my friends, like, you tell the truth, you want good for everybody, you'll fight for anybody, like that aspect. I'm like, okay. So for me, it was really hard playing a skald who is like kind of a thief and lies to people. He's very roguish, I would say. So that was my character from my game. And my friend's character was the same. I used those two characters in this new story and part of our old campaign. And I got to a certain point where I was like, it's hard because I'm not smarmy like him, and he just, you know what I mean? And but I tweaked the character as a writer. I was like, oh, it's hard. And then, but I did a thing where I changed the storyline just a little bit, where at the beginning, you get everything throughout the book, and then 3/4 of the way of the book, the way these two characters act, and like they do good things, so you're like, you relate to them as a reader. But then when you get to the end, I switch a thing that made me feel better as a person writing these two characters, and then you're like, oh, that's why they did X, and you literally go, and it like goes back in time a little, and you see all these things differently that they did. So instead of them being kind of like jerks, you're like, oh, they were doing all this for a reason that makes total sense. But for me as a writer, I got really meta on myself. But like at first I was like, oh, it just wasn't sticking. And then I just changed one thing and it made me feel better about the writing. And then my friends were like, oh, that's way more interesting. So I think I totally get what you're saying. It's hard to not write yourself into every character, right? You want to let that character speak. So I was able to find a way to hit the, middle of the road, I would say, and still make everything really interesting for everybody, but also make it be something that, I felt like I could put a pin in, in that character, in that story. So I think it's hard sometimes to step back and take yourself out of a character, I think is what makes total sense, especially for the main character.
Another thing as well, which you said, which I wanted to get on very quick, is you said you're a martial artist. So I haven't done martial arts in about 3.5 years, or about 4, probably longer than that. But I done Aikido, Wing Chun and Krav Maga, a little bit of boxing. And one element you might enjoy in the book is that I actually created my own martial art in this book.
Oh, awesome.
And I kind of looked at other martial arts, watched them, and then tried to create my own martial art around it and write those scenes into the book. And they use something called a kakar as well, which is essentially a bow. So I watched a lot of martial art use with bow, and writing that was a challenge to make it effective. But I like to think that it gives it a certain authenticity. So the martial art is actually called Crissel, and it's I'd say the closest thing I can compare it to would be like Krav Maga, because the prophet in the books, the Kaif, teaches it to the elderly, the women, and the people who he perceives as a little bit more frail. But as with Krav Maga, it's more a defense, like a strike, and then get away. And I've sort of like put that into the book as well. So you've got that element in there as well, which Naya's also taught, which she also hates being taught as well, because she thinks once she's taught that and people see her fighting, then they're going to think, oh, you cannot only got these powers, you can also do martial arts as well. But they're saying you really need to, essentially, she meets a friend who says you really need to start embracing what you've got, because nobody else has got it. You've got to stop sulking, and you're going to need to help people. And it's that balance, it's that conflict which she deals with throughout a lot of the books, and towards the end she makes a choice.
I think you just first of all, that's amazing. I love that. My friends are always like, you should write this. I'm like, I used to write like my own. I had a book I was writing about my own, like my own philosophy of martial arts and like how I see it and like the physical, like how I put things together and things. So for a long time I was doing that, and then it was like a nonfiction book. So I just got so into that lately I've just been kind of sticking away. But my friends recently were like, and I interviewed a couple of authors in season 3 that are martial artists that did a lot of level progression fantasy and stuff. So I keep having some of my friends are like, oh, we really want to see your perspective. So at some point I'm gonna have to like add like a month or something,
I'd love to see your thoughts on some of the scenes as a martial artist.
Yeah, but that's really, but I love reading that stuff. I think like that's just so cool that you did that. I think I love seeing how people do that because everybody has their own take, and I've just seen so many great ones, particularly with sci-fi. I don't know what it is about sci-fi. I feel like people. I think it's because it's a little bit different of a world, right? And there's different things you have to think about from a defense or an attack standpoint, right? I think that's what made Star Wars so cool with like Kirk Canis, who's like the ex royal guard of the Emperor, and he like takes on all these like Jedi and stuff, Dark Jedi and others. And it's just like you're like, how does somebody do that? How do they train their body enough to do that? But I think sci-fi is cool, right? There's different weapons, there's attacks, there's different techniques, there's different species. It just makes it a lot more fun, I think, to write. So I think it makes it more fun to read than in in a fantasy setting. That's like one thing I think sci-fi does better than fantasy is martial arts. Sorry, all you monk people out there from D&D. People are gonna start raging in the monk. I don't have it right now. It's somewhere. I have like my paladin cup, which is so cool. I have a ranger one, and then my wife's like, they're so cool. She's like, I'm gonna get you the monk one next. So don't worry, guys. I play monk a lot. But yeah, that's super cool. I think it's just neat when people can take that experience, and put it into their world building and do something, really unique with it. So I think that's my thing is I don't really have anything I think unique to do with it yet. So I don't want to just do something that, has already been done, if that makes sense. So once I figure out something cool to, to do, or that's like, like I have a couple of authors I'm interviewing, like Taiwan, like I have him coming on soon. So I thought that would be really good to kind of talk about, because he has like a cultivator, which is really cool. And there's like martial arts in his, and it's really neat. But yeah, I love seeing and hearing how different writers do that, because it's always really cool. I had a couple of people had just different skills that they've learned over the years and put them into different fantasy or sci-fi settings, and it's always really cool to see how people do that. There was something else that you said. I'm sure I'll think of it. There's something else you said too that I thought was really cool. So just in terms of, I always think about that. Like, what if I got superpowers tomorrow, right? And people always ask you, right? Like, what superpower do you want? So I, for years, was like, oh, I want to fly. I want super strength or super speed. But I think now when I get older, I'm like, I would love the ability to heal people. But the problem with that is I would feel really guilty not working at, I work at a school. Not a lot of sick people here, or that sick, right? I think I would feel guilty not working.
The power would be no use. There's not enough sick people there.
Well, you know what I mean? Like, but it's like, I started thinking about this because I saw it on an old Sci-Fi or an old X-Files episode from the 90s. And there was a guy that was going around hospitals and he could heal people. And then they were tracking him down. And then, Scolder and Mulder, whatever, the two main characters, like Mulder and Scully, they're trying to locate him before this black ops group can get to him or whatever. And I thought, God, would that make a great story of a superhero who could only heal people, but like literally it's like a doctor or nurse, but like you can't heal too many people because then the government would find you essentially, or an organization. They try to exploit you. And I always think about that. And my thing is like, even if you had superpowers like her, right? If you have a family, and that's why I like now the new Superman like TV show, really puts a strain on him and Lois's relationship and with his kids, right? Because he's like, at one point he's like, I'm a superhero, like this is what I do, like you knew this, and she's like, well, we're your family. And it's like, I think that dynamic that you touched on in the book is just great, because even if you do have powers, like you said, right, she's got to turn away from this kid and these people being attacked, but she's got to worry about her own kids. I'm always like, where do you put your kid in a self-defense?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, let alone this war.
That was a that was a writing challenge a lot of the time. That was a writing challenge. Like, that doesn't make sense. What's she going to do with the kid? And also with her powers, they're more kind of what's one looking for? They're more like evolution based. So I've tried to make them as natural as I could make them. I spoke to quite a few helpful people, some scientists, some evolution based experts. Yeah, because and I said, like, so I always think of it as the powers that she has is almost as if a human could. I know they can't. You can't sort of evolve, but if a human could develop, let's say, a protection. So the protection for like a porcupine is, I don't know, shoving its spikes up. Protection for I don't know, like a lizard is spitting acid. It turns out that the natural evolutionary path for a human would be what I call in the book fire and light, which is essentially throwing fire from the hands. But when she does it, it's extremely painful, because how she got it is not, it's all natural. So not only does she resent the powers, which everybody sees her doing them and they're like, oh, this is amazing. To her, it's absolutely excruciating. It's horrible. It damages her body, it like ruins, scars up her body. So she's got all of that to deal with. And yet people still want her to use them. And she doesn't even want these damn powers in the first place. So there's a whole conflict that's always going on. And she does eventually sort of learn to work with them, but she's always got that with her. And like, there's, as you said, there's a point in the book where there's a boy who says, like, why are you moaning? It's amazing. You've got these powers. This is what you should always want. And she's like, everybody says that until you actually get it. And if you think about it, a lot of the powers that you've got, like even your power of healing is great, but then there's going to be somebody who's going to be upset in some way. There's going to be, the demand's going to get so high that you're not going to be able to keep up with it. Whenever you get a power, there's always going to be like a negative to it. Like my one would be, the ultimate one I always think is the ability to travel through time, like the body physically just traveling through time.
Yeah.
I go back, I change one thing, like go back a few years, say, you know, save my old man, save my dad who's passed away, but then that could have a knock-on effect on something else. And then my best mate's going to go, well, could you do this for me as well? Then I do that. And that has everything's got a negative. And that's what she's trying to tell him. Yeah, I've got this, I've got these powers, but with it comes this negative as well.
No, I totally get that. And I do like and I think that's where I'm just gonna go back to, because it's on my mind lately, I guess, the new Superman.
I need to watch that. I want to watch that. What is it on Amazon?
I thought someone told me it was on Amazon, and I thought the station was like the CW, but I think it's on Amazon. But it's so interesting because my friend, we've been talking about this privately in a writing like conversation, and he's like, the negative setback for Superman, unless it's kryptonite, is nothing. And I said, that's not true. And I referenced the show. I said, literally, if his fallback or setback of using his powers is being gone, even though he's faster than a speeding bullet, it's like he still has to be gone. I cannot imagine being able, and I don't think people realize the true psyche of Superman or even Batman. And I love how people have really reanalyzed them recently to be more human, particularly Superman, because imagine being able to hear anybody from anywhere in the world. How on earth do you have a life? That goes back to my healing character, right? How do you have a life? Like, I keep thinking, like, if I had powers like that, I never would have had met my wife, because I wouldn't have had time. I would have been healing people, particularly in like probably sick wards with children. I'd be at like St. Jude's, and I'd be, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'd be rotating. And it's like, what you,
it always become commercial, wouldn't it? Like, bring on the next one, bring on the next one,
right? Yeah. But it's like you be so messed. I was thinking about this character. I'm like, you'd be so messed up. Like, you'd probably barely be able to eat, barely be able to sleep. Because if you're like me, you would want to heal as many people. You think every second is a waste, right? I could have saved somebody. And if you couldn't save somebody, I think the fact that you have the power would make it even worse. So I'm like thinking about the characterization. And that's where I was saying to my friend, we're talking about this character, right? And I'm like, even if it's a short story, I might give it a go, because I think the psyche is good. But we were talking about Superman. And I'm like, imagine being able to hear a kid and it's just down the street, right? But you're at your kid's birthday party. Do you go? Do you not go? And I think just asking those questions is exactly what you're saying. And it's like, if they just go all the time, there's no story, in my opinion. But like you have, right? Like, don't help. And then either way, there's a consequence, right? And then that's what makes it interesting. But I think the new Superman show, it's great because now there is a consequence to this demigod. Even if it's not physical for him, it's emotional and it's on his relationship. And I think that's, as the writers, I think they did a much better job understanding him as a character and being able to bring those types of problems forth. Because how do you attack a demigod?
Exactly, yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that's, you know, what makes your characters interesting too, right? Is you have these powers, but it's like, how do you use them? When do you use them? Who do you use them to help? Who don't you? And again, you have a kid. Like I was telling people, they're like, they asked me today, like, did you grade my papers? I'm like, no, I had a kid and just like, you know, I can't say
as the story. As the story's going on as well, like Nay, the main character, she meets a young girl who becomes a good friend with her, and their friendship like develops, and she finds that not only does she have the fire and the light, there's these other powers that are slowly emerging but growing naturally. So it starts off as she'll have a random thought in her head as she walks past somebody, and she's like, "What's that? I don't know." Then as the book goes on, she has another thought that's a bit stronger. Then as the book goes on, these are just examples. As the book goes on, she'll have a thought of a tree falling, and then 2 seconds later, the tree will fall. She'll be like, okay. And then as it goes on, she starts physically hearing thoughts. Then she starts realizing in the middle of battle scenes, she knows what punch is coming next. And this is all her developing. So the boy in the story thinks, this is amazing. This is great. This is great. You've got these powers. But when it comes to her friend who sees her as a friend, but then as she's trying not to read her friend's mind, there's actually romantic intentions there. That ruins her friendship because she doesn't feel that way, yet she can tell what her friend's thinking. So what you would think would be a great power is actually bad. Let's say, for example, somebody that she really cares for finds out that the thought that she has for them is like, oh my God, if she comes again, she's really bloody annoying. That's not a specific example in the book, but that's what she has to deal with. It's not all rosy. Add on to that a religious war that's happening and a planet-wide invasion from these beings, which everyone wants her to deal with. It's a lot. I feel for her.
I think just having a kid.
You know what it's like as a writer. You start to get passionate for your characters, don't you? You know what it's like. You know what it's like.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. It's like, oh yeah, my wife was talking to me about one character. She goes, "You're so mean." And I'm like, "No, it's okay." I'm like, "Eventually, this will happen." She goes, "You're so mean." Yeah, so I totally get it. I'm like, well, if there's no stick, then carrot, no stick. I'm like, one without the other. I'm like, nothing happens in a story, So it's like you have to have a carrot and a stick for either way, And I was like, it just so happens that this poor character gets a lot of sticks instead of carrots gets him. But yeah, that keeps him going, right? Till a certain point. So yeah, I think it's hard to find that at times. But I think if you can, right, like you're saying, like I feel like you have a good grasp of your character, which I think a lot of people lack. And I think that's another thing too about going back to taking your time. I've had people ask me like, when's your novella coming out? When's your urban fantasy? I'm like, when I can get this thing, I don't want to complete it. I want it to be done, if that makes sense. I know they're always like, oh, it'll never be done. I'm like, yeah, but to a certain point, right, it'll be done. And you want people to read it. And I'm a pretty patient person. So I'm like, I'm gonna make sure that the product matches how much time and energy and years it's taken, to put into it. Yeah, but I think it's good that you have a good grasp on your character. Like I said earlier too, you're not just, oh, this is what's going to happen. Because I think that just gives you a much better story. And I think I do believe in the long run when people do that, and let their characters be characters, like you let your kids be kids, right? You can help them along the way, but they're going to screw up. It's like,
oh. Yeah, that's it. That's what it was like. That's what it was like.
Yeah. You're like, I wish you did this, but are they really going to? I am a teacher, so it happens all the time. No. Like I told kids today, I go, we have a quiz tomorrow on The Martian, these chapters 14, 15, and 16. I'm like, please read. We have like a reading. They can listen. They can watch a video that summarizes. It's like, there's no reason to not have it done unless you just didn't do it. And I guarantee you, we're gonna have 3 people tomorrow out of 15 not have done it and probably not do so hot on the quiz. And it's like no matter what we do, right? And I feel that's like characters too. It's like no matter what you do, some characters just want to do their own thing. I had a character, she told me recently, she goes, I'm not in this book. And I'm like, I've written this book for 14 years. To hell you're not. She's like, no, I'm in, no, it's this character. This other character comes in. Right? No, seriously, it pissed me off. And then she goes, oh no, I am. And I'm like, okay. She goes, I'm in this other book. I'm like, damn it. And then this other character is like, yeah, this female character is in this book. And I'm like, I hate you guys. And then the character is leaving. She goes, oh, but she's still created this new class of character. She goes, she's actually this class. And I'm like, you guys just messed me up. And then the guy goes, hey, by the way, I'm a thief taker, not like a whatever, like a class I have.
Only writers understand. Only writers understand.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why, if anybody wants to know, that's why my book, A Thief's Ambition, is not out yet, because these characters will just not. But in the end, my friend, I'm telling him, and I'm going through this new outline. He's like, God, this is so much better. I'm like, well, it's going to be a lot better once it's done. But I think again, it goes to not just, we always talk about writer's voice, right? And your tone, but I think we forget that it's really that you need to be able to grasp your character's voice or voices, right? And then their tones, which then helps you to establish yours. So I think we always kind of forget the characters, at least, in that respect. But cool. That was a lot of cool stuff there. Man, so we got through question 4 really well, I would say. So that was much better than I had planned. But I'm kind of curious that, like, what was your main focus when it came to the world building for this novel?
I think it started when I went to Eddie, who designed the book cover. I knew what Nay looked like, but I didn't have an idea for the background. And then when I thought of the world, I thought I liked the idea of this paradise planet, this sort of tropical jungle planet, but then it's sort of awkwardly had technology forced upon it. So what would normally naturally take sort of like 700-800 years for a civilization to progress and to have its tech intertwine within the world naturally, it's all happened so quickly in the world of project preservation, unnaturally quick. So when I think of building this world, I think of it as being almost like a world of like awkward tech. Sort of, I see myself in when I see myself in the world, and you know what it's like as a writer. When I see myself in the world, I see myself as like, so I'll be sitting in the world, and there'll be like an android that would walk past if I'm sitting here now. But then there's no such thing as smartphones or internet because the technology is odd. Like the vehicles, they are flying vehicles, but they're air powered. So instead of being high tech, if we actually saw them, we'd realize that they shouldn't be doing that, but they don't aesthetically look high tech. And that's what the world is like. So yeah. So there's like there's not TV screens, but there's TVs, but they're kind of like a sepia black and white as opposed to color. Yet they're shipped within the book that can travel faster than the speed of light. And this odd sort of balance of, well, this some things are technologically advanced, some aren't, is because the tech was essentially pushed on the planet, literally pushed on the planet by a woman in the book called Mabior, who's the supreme leader. She's essentially the most powerful person in the book. She has control over the Golokan army, which is one faction of the planet. And what she'd done when she was around 13, she'd done something called the Enlightenment Drive. And this goes into the world building. She'd done something called the Enlightenment Drive, which was essentially, she's got such a love, such a passion for tech, for technology, for androids, for all the benefits that it brings. She forced the agricultural areas of the world to embrace it. So essentially, as a farmer, you'd get a knock on your door, there'd be an android there. I'm an android from Mabior's, from the government of Mabior, the Golokan government. We're upgrading your farm, but I don't want to. No, we're going to upgrade it. And she forced that across the planet. And in her doing that, that's how I had an idea of how the world was built. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. So they haven't had thousands of years to develop a beautiful civilization. It's all very awkward and weird. You'll have androids, and then but you won't have smartphones. You know what I mean? There's no internet in the world, yet you'll have these sort of things. And I really enjoy that because it's odd, it's strange, it's a little bit different. And then off the back of that, that's essentially how I built the world. It is all based on one planet. And then, yeah, I sort of like, see, when I approached it, like I read several books on how to do world building. I watched a few videos. This was the first book, but none of it really sat with me. So I just kind of, as I told you at the beginning, I started off with that image of Nay working on the Android head, and then the world built itself around there. So somebody said to me, how do you do world building? I don't actually really know. I just sort of wrote it, felt it, and as I went through each draft, I thought, that doesn't make sense in that world. I'll take that out. I'll take that out. I'll take that out. So that's really how my world was built, if that made sense without me going on too much.
No, it makes total sense. I think that's really cool too. And that's like that's one I haven't really, I mean, that's like, I would say that's like an older like sci-fi trope, in some regard, or like not even sci-fi, but like steampunk, right? Like, because that's essentially steampunk.
Yeah. You could say that. You could say that.
Yeah, which what is really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's like really cool way to do it, which makes it really unique. And I don't know, like that's like, just people always ask about world building, and I'm like, just do what you want to do. Like, try and mix and match, like there's just so many, like I always tell people, like, go with what you find is really interesting, start. And then I was thinking, you have to do the iceberg, right? You have to have all these things. And now I'm like, no, I'll go through and I'll just write, and I'll just look, or I'll, play a game or talk to someone like you, and I'll be driving. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I'll just add it to my notes, right?
Yeah. That's what I do.
Yeah. Because really, I think better stuff comes out that way, because then you're, even if you're subconsciously thinking about it. But I think that's really cool. I can see the aesthetic in my head, and it's really neat. And I think there's a lot of things that, moving forward with the world, like there's just so many cool things you can do with it, the way, that you set it up. And that's really neat. And there's a lot of problems, I think, that you'll have.
Exactly. Yeah, the problems are fun.
Yeah. Which I think is great with world building, right? I think if people think you have to have a world, it has to make sense. And I'm like, no, our world doesn't make sense. We talked about it before we got recorded, and it's like, yeah, it's like life is stranger than fiction, and it's like, it's just like, pick a thing, right? Like, I was talking to my mom about that the other day. I was like driving from work home, and the things that happened to me, I'm like, she's like, you're a writer, you wouldn't have written that. I'm like, no. I'm like, you try to think of the craziest thing, and then life, throws you a curveball. It's even crazier. So I think, if you just kind of think about it that way, right? Like, just put in what you think is cool, and the tropes that you like, and then think of different ways you can use them. I think I've just seen so many cool people do what you were talking about, and just, this is what I thought of, this is what I want, and then create, the story around that, or intertwine them. And I think you just get really cool things that way. But I like that you mentioned, right, it's like, you didn't know what you were doing. Well, I don't think anybody really does, right? Because Tolkien did it a totally different way than you and I are both doing it, right? And I think that's totally fine.
Tolkien, I love that. That's great. I'll take that bit out.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? It's like, I George Lucas, like his original, I have a graphic novel like issue, or a comic issue 1. I want the graphic novel version, but like, of the original art and the ideas he had, the screenplay was very different, but I think it was a lot cooler in a lot of respects. And I think it's cool that somebody created a comic, and then I think somebody was creating an anime about, like, the original storyline and stuff. But he went about his world building far different than, the rest of us. So I think that's really where you get some really cool and interesting things. But, well, that's awesome. I'm excited to see that in the book. And you talked a little bit about the like technology or science fiction, and some of those things, but were there any tropes in particular that you focused on in this book?
There are some. Sometimes it could be, I don't know if embarrassed is the right word, but trope sometimes has, I feel like it's got a bit of a negative connotation. Like, oh, it's the same thing. But I can't remember if we recorded it or not at the beginning. But when I said to you, I enjoy that. So while Nay doesn't have a companion, there is somebody else in the book called Ad, who is trying to find Nay for a particular reason. It's kind of like a soldier, he's trying to find Nay, but he's got his android companion. And it's a trope, nice. But I love it. I love it.
It's awesome, yeah. Well, what's his name? The droid from Rogue One, like, whatever. Yeah. He was one of the best parts of the movie, like, exactly.
So it's I'm not gonna lie, it's similar. It's a similar sort of idea. The android's very different, but it's similar because I enjoy that. I've got that in it. It's a first contact novel, not shying away from that. It is first contact, but it's done very differently. So there are some tropes in it. There's some elements, sort of. There's also something which I haven't discussed in it. So religion is in the book, but no Earth-based religions. So
cool.
yeah, like it plays not a large part, but it's throughout the book, because you've got the Gullah Khans, who, as I said, Mabior shit, that they embrace technology, they love tech, they think the world should embrace it. Every house should have an Android, like every house has a smartphone kind of thing. That's how they see it. Then you've got the Oscillians, who follow the prophet that I mentioned at the beginning, Staccath.
Yep.
And they're a religious-based race. So you've got one half of the planet, which is essentially like, let's say 7 billion people who follow Mabior, and the other half of the planet follows Staccath. The Mabior half is the technology-based half, and the half of the planet that follows Staccath are the more religious-based half. And obviously the religion is from the Oscillian book, which is the book which Staccath wrote. Now he gets revelations from what he perceives as God, writes these down, and then that's where the tussle between the two happen, and that's where the religious war starts. And what essentially has sparked the religious war on this planet is that Mabior is saying, we have the ability on this planet to travel faster than the speed of light. We've got the ships that have been created. But Staccath, the prophet, says that's blasphemous. To try and go to the stars, to try and go to the heart of God, is blasphemous. So they've always had this, that basically they haven't used the technology to not start a religious war. Something happens, something appears in the sky, and then Mabior says, right, we need to go up and see what it is. And the only way we're going to do that is if we use the technology which we know we've got. Staccath says, do not use the technology, because it's blasphemous to leave the planet to try and think you're better than God. They decide to do it, and then that's when the religious war sparks off, and that's how you've got the two sides there. So that's not so much of the trope, that's more my little take on it. But there are the tropes in there, but I do tell people it's religion. It's got religion in it, but not no Earth-based religions. So if you don't like the idea of religion, I'll say, I don't know, it might be something you might have to think about, but it is in it. But as far as tropes, it's mainly there's a time travel element, but it's not throughout the whole book. You're not zipping around throughout time. There's a little element of something in there, which obviously I'm not going to say. One little element of something in there with regards to time travel. It's the best way to say it. So you've got your tropes in there.
I love me some tropes, because I get to something and I'm like, yep, that's for me, and then I like how you said, like, being, with still being unique, right? And I think that makes total sense. I love elves, don't get me wrong. I love a traditional elf, like Tolkien, right? Like, I don't care, like,
a dragon or two.
Yeah, well, like, why am I blanking today? I love the one elf who's just like fighting everybody. It was just awesome. In the first season of Rings of Power, he's the only reason I really was like, I really want to watch season 2, and he made me like, I had to write an elf character, like a traditional elf character for him. He was so amazing. I was like, oh my god, like he made elves cool again. I was like, since Legolas, I'm like, but like I thought he was better. And I was like, sorry, everybody, but he was one of my favorite characters within the last couple years. I don't know why I'm blanking on all these names say, but like for me, like in my fantasy, one of my worlds, like I have plant-based elves where they're half plant or tree, and that's why like they have chloroplast skin. That's why they don't eat meat. So I go off of some of those traditional tropes, right? They don't sleep. Yeah, right. And like I just change a little bit. Orcs, I have orcs, but they're different. Like, and I have other fantasy stuff where it's like more traditional tropes, where it's just like it's just fun for me to live in the trope world. And I go into there, but there's other things like my own world of Uma where it's like I just want it to be a little unique, and I take dwarves. I have dwarves, but they're half like rock, and they can do some rock things. And have control of the earth. So there's just like kind of things like that. But I think it's cool, right? Like I like kind of to ride the wave sometimes. I like to see where people do the traditional trope, but then also maybe they're able to add something new or unique. Sometimes I go for a safe trope. Sometimes I just want to see something new. But I like seeing non-earth based religions, because as a history teacher, I find them so fascinating. As a sociological, person, I love studying different societies. I love them within fantasy and sci-fi. So I think it's so cool, you know, to really see what people are able to come up with. Because to me, it's like only 1 to 2% of our, you know, entire history has been written down. So I think a lot of it's in that brain, you know, that writer brain in
That's an
particular.
interesting statistic. I didn't really think about that. That's an
Yeah,
interesting
it's really
statistic.
small. It's really small. And I think that's probably changed the last couple of years. And the thing is like we just talked about it today in my class, writing, and that's another thing for world building, right? With being history being more, sorry, people, Eurocentric, particularly in the time in which a lot of different civilizations were discovered or studied. It was in a time of colonialism, imperialism, right? Whether it's the Americas, Europe, whatever. And we just talked about today where like you have Native American tribes who do have a system of writing. It's just different. So I think that's an interesting world building thing too, is like, you know, language, we always say language. So we talked about today where like, just because written language wasn't the same as other groups of people, we don't attribute some of these groups of people as being a civilization, because you have to have 5 particular things, and writing system is one of them. But even if your writing system is different, which I think makes things more interesting, some people at the time, particularly when these different groups of people and their things were being discovered, people didn't consider them a civilization because they didn't have writing like everybody else. So I think learning history is interesting, or about different societies or groups of people, because you can take something like that and then use that, you know, to your advantage within any form of writing. So I think it's really cool when people do that. People always ask me like, what's the biggest advantage you have as a history teacher? I'm like, I understand religion, societies, you know, and how people interact and the social hierarchies and things. When you understand those, but then, you know, you're able to kind of mix and match, like you were saying, right? Like with these 2 different groups, they're not, you know, non-earth based religions, but that's a great power struggle right there with those enduring issues. And to me, that's really interesting. So I got to really see how that pans out. So I think that's really cool. That's what
It's
keeps
also,
me coming back to it. So
it's also as well, when you say about tropes, like for me, as we said before, like I don't read a lot of fantasy, but if I read fantasy, I want the tropes. That's why I'm picking it up. I want elf in there. I want a dragon in there. I want a hero story in there, and I want some kind of wizard in there who passes on advice. Do you know what I'm saying? I want those. But to me, it's not bad. It's almost like going to your favorite restaurant, getting you what you want on the menu
yep.
because you know you
Yeah.
like it.
Yeah.
I know
Well, it's a great
I
way
know
to
what
put
I
it.
like. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I totally get it. Like, and that's where Rings of Power, people were dissonant, right? They're like, well, there's never been this or that. I'm like, I don't care. I'm like, did you see my bro, this elf there? Right?
Yeah,
Like, just the first time he turned in the trailer,
exactly,
right?
yeah.
The teaser trailer, right? He turned, he was just like, bam, and he was just doing stuff. And it's like, sold, you know. I'll go back. I didn't really like episode 1, but I'll go back for him. I will go back for him. I liked Arwen. Or what's her name? Galadriel. I liked her. I actually liked that she was more of a, you know, in your face. I think some people didn't like her because she's, you know, a female elf and she's telling everybody what to do. So I think some of their real life things are coming in. But I was like, man, I like that. I was like, she was awesome. And I was like, if you really go back and look at things, she's telling everybody what to do in The Hobbit and in Lord of the Rings. So I don't know where people had that problem. But I loved her. I was like, this is awesome. I love that she had the sword and was, you know, going after everybody, and she's climbing up the ice wall. Like there were just so many cool things where I'm like, I like strong, independent female characters because that's how I was raised, with strong, independent women. Love my dad, but that's how I was raised. And I'm like, I want to see that because that's what I know. And I've read Elaine Cunningham, who's one of the greatest female writers of all time, authors, and she had so many great characters. I want to see those types of characters. Loved James's character in the Silver Blood Promise. He had a couple of really good ones that were just amazing female leads that were just really, really fun. Flea was amazing. You know, and I want roguish characters like his main character because I just love the rogues. I don't know, you know, so I totally agree. It is like a menu. You go for these things and you want those things to be at that restaurant because that's what you have a hankering for. So when I pick up your sci-fi book, I want those, you know, different things. I think that makes total sense. Otherwise, what's the point, you know?
Exactly.
It's really cool. I like that. I'm gonna give you credit, but I like the menu thing, the restaurant. So, this is a hard one. So what can readers expect from these characters and universe in the future? Are you thinking about book 2? Are we kind of each one standalone? Just kind of curious at kind of what you're thinking so far for that next read in this universe.
I like how you said it's a hard one. It is a hard one, isn't it? So with regards to project preservation, I was very specific that the book is all contained. It's all contained. So you got her original story, you got her lot story, her growth, the middle section, emotional development is all contained. It could be 5, 6 separate small books in one. So from start to end, the world is contained, and then it's done with, however it finishes. However, there's so many characters in there. There's so many. The book actually takes place over the span of like 100,000 years, really. So there's so much. Yeah, there's so much going on in there that the prequel side character potential for new stories is almost endless. When you read the book, you'll see there's so much going on with so many different characters. The only thing is with me, as I can't remember whether we recorded it or not, it takes me so long to write that to write a side story like that, you know, I don't know if I could do something small, because with me, when I'm writing, and I've only written one book, but I want every book that I write to be, even if not necessarily as in amazing, the best writing, because writing's a skill, it develops. My next book's going to be better, obviously, but I want the concept, the idea, the twist. There's like 3 or 4 twists in this. I want them to be jaw droppers, as in, oh my god, I didn't even see that coming. Oh, what the f? That's what I want. And to do that, unless you're super talented, it's very, very, very bleeping hard. Very hard.
Yeah.
Very, very hard. As I said, so I finally got that for the next story that I've got. But as I told you before, it's took me about nine months to a year of building it in my head, because I'm a plotter, a super plotter. 9 months of building it in my head, and I'm like, oh, I got it. And I'll tell you how I got it. I had the ending for the book for this next story, not related to project preservation. I had the ending for a long time. The middle was a little bit, as is always the way, a little bit, I don't know what I'm going to do with that, but I'll get something in there. Yeah, I'll get some, I'll fill that out. But I didn't have the beginning. And I had the beginning last night. I've got my bedroom and my gaming room. I'm a big gamer. And my gaming room in there. And I crunched up on the sofa, went to sleep, and I had a dream where all I can see is, or all I saw in this dream was essentially this guy running around. Something's happening, and he's got to get his 2 sons to safety. I thought I was that guy as it was happening. I thought it was my son, but I didn't know what was going on. I was scared. People are running. I don't know if you played The Last of Us. Are you a gamer?
Oh, I've tried, but that's ever since my son was born. I haven't gotten much done besides podcasting and writing.
Have you played The Last of Us? Not you probably haven't played The Last of Us.
No, but I mean, my best friend, he's talked about it quite a bit.
Yeah,
so we've
fantastic.
had quite a few writing conversations about, if that makes sense. Like he'll relate to it. So.
Yes, brilliant. Essentially, at the beginning, the dad is in the middle of this massive event that's happening. Everybody's running around screaming, and that's what I had in my dream. Something was going on, almost if it was not alien invaded, but something was happening. Like, let's say a tsunami or a massive something was happening. Quick, we've got to go, and that become the beginning to this new story. So I thought, oh, that's good. So I had the ending, which I had for a while, the middle, and I finally got the beginning. Locked those 3 pieces together alongside the other notes that I've got, and I finally got my next book in my head. I'm going to start writing it. I'm going to start the big initial process over the next few days. So I was lucky enough to actually build up quite a significant amount of people on my mailing list, and I don't want to keep them sitting there with nothing for a long time. So I really want to I want to get going on it now. So there's nothing project preservation wise at the moment, unless obviously people enjoy it and it sells well and people say we want more, then there's definitely side stories or prequels I could do. But my next thing that I've got planned is sci-fi. It's big, it's massive, and the concept I think is going to be incredible. But it's all right having it up there. You got to get it, you got to write it, you got to get the beta readers, you got to get the beta readers to read it and say, what the hell is that? Get rid of that. Change that, take that bit out. But yeah, so essentially, in answer to your question, yes, something else is coming very, very soon, hopefully, and there will be more project preservation stuff if people want it.
Oh, perfect. Well, that kind of leads us to our last one too. you know, where you kind of already mentioned with any news updates, current projects, things like that. So I think that sounds really, really cool. You got me really interested now, just with talking about like how you came up with like the beginning and stuff. It's funny because I had
Yeah,
a dream about that. Like, I think it was like an alien invasion, and we were like in like the Florida Keys or something, and like on a boat, and then like stuff just started crashing down, and we
that's
had to
it. Yeah,
like
it was like black. I
it
was
was
running
crazy.
around
Yeah,
and I thought, oh, that's good. I'll use that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because my wife always teasing me, my mom, they're like, your writer brain's worse than eating Rocky Road before bedtime. I'm like, it really is. But yeah, that's just how it goes sometimes. I had one the other day. I was talking to my friend here where we went on a like a hike on Friday, and I was talking to one of my other friends, and they happened to like all meet in the summer and stuff. And for some reason, my writer brain just like threw stuff together, and I was like, I woke up, I was like, this was just like a strange dream where like all these things that would never happen happened, and we're all together. I was just like, it was super weird. And so I was like, I just felt like my writer brain has just been going like nonstop lately when I have a dream or whatever.
It's always there. It's always there. Like
Yeah, yeah,
I'll be
yeah.
sitting, something will be happening. I'll be sitting with my wife, and I get my phone. It's like, "Are you on that phone again?" I said, "No, I've got this idea. I've got to put it down." And I've got this.
Yeah,
The next book is essentially just all these different chunks. Like scroll down all these different chunks on my phone, and I think, how the hell am I going to get that into some kind of order? But are you? Do you tend to plan, or do you freestyle as you write? I'm a planner.
I tend to do both. I write down notes, and then I tend to do like an outline. Last year during Nano, because I had like my son was still really young and I could only write in splurts, I ended up doing like 3 whole outlines that were anywhere from 5 to like 10,000 words each. So I had one that's like I had this Diablo story in mind where it's like I call it the ties that bind, and it's like there's these. It's a fighter retires from a blacksmith in a town. Their sorceress companion who retires to be like a medic or a doctor in the same village. Then the thief character, he's like, screw you guys, I'm not settling down. So 10 years later, he comes back, ends up going into a local ruin near them, takes a thing out that he's not supposed to, and it unleashes all these undead and things. That's where the Diablo stuff comes in, these demons and stuff.
Okay.
And then the 3 of them, it attacks the village, takes a bunch of kids. One that their old captain, the warrior blacksmith, or he's like, we gotta go get this kid back, you know, like this is our fault, like your fault. And they go in and do their thing, and I like outline the whole thing, and you know, I end up like 10,000 word outline. Those were the 3 best outlines I think I've done. So at some point next year, once I get a couple other things published and stuff, I can't wait to go back to them. But I've learned over time that I'm like in between. Like there are certain, like my D&D story, it's like I've plotted out quite a bit of it. I can't do like a, who's I just talking to? They do like a 60-page outline. It's like 50,000 words. I'm like, I can't do that for even if it's an epic fantasy book. You know what I mean? I'm like, I can't do that because I'll get to a certain point, and that's right where my novella is like for draft 5 is some people were like my friend Logan D. Irons. He has this Bridget King's novella, great. Oaths of Blood, great. Everybody should check him out. But he was like, oh, a couple of these things aren't working. H.L. Tinsley, she was they were my 2 like alpha readers. So like both said the same thing. They're like, some of these things need to, your first scene doesn't make sense. So I thought I was good to go, and I had written a different one, and I gave that to them, and then they're like, my developmental editor's like, that's not really working either. She was okay with it more, but I was like, I think I need to do a new one. Well, it's been so hard because now I'm like more used to outlining, and I had the whole thing done. So I have to like almost relearn my old skill of being a pantser or an exploratory, you know, author or writer to be able to finish, to make everything fit back together with my outline. I think that's like, I'm at like a new level that I've ever been before. So it's been a lot harder for me. I have 3.5 scenes left to finish. Then I just have to change some names and some things and add some more things within the book, the novella. But it's like, it's been so hard because I've never had to do that because I'm usually just exploring. But now that I've outlined more, it's like I've had to learn how to combine both skills, and I'm not quite there yet. So with this novella, I'll be able to do that. So if you asked me that question, my friend, in January, I don't know what I'll say.
It's interesting.
It's like now I'm like in between because I'll do an outline and I'll plot, but I still need enough in there. So like my ties that bind, like it's a dark fantasy. I have to have enough of an outline to know like I have to get through point A, B, and C in each chapter. so everything goes. I caught my friend recently called them like waypoints, you know, where you can go one way or the other.
Yeah, waypoint is good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good way. It's weird though,
Like,
because like as a first time really writing, obviously you go to writing advice books and one way does it this, the five save the cat, save the hang the rabbit theory, or whatever it is. And then all of these different things. As a new writer, like, oh my god, there's all these things. So I thought, right, I'll take basically I read quite a lot of stuff, watched some videos. I took the bits that I thought, I'll use that, but I didn't have a set structure. So for me, I had the rough idea, which I have to build in my head first, the beginning, the end. I like a cool twist. Then once I've got that, I'll write down chunks of notes. Then I'll write the characters down, and then I tend to, I'll have the beginning, middle, and end, but not every exact part.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then I'll write it almost as if I'm playing a movie in my mind, and I'll sit there and I think, oh, that's good. And then I'll type up what I've just thought. And then I've got an idea what I want to happen in the next chapter. I'll put next chapter, dot, couple of sentences, dot, couple of sentences, dot, couple of sentences, then that's it. And then I'll get writing. But then as I'm doing that, things happen. So I'm kind of like 90% planner and then a 10% pantster or freestyler, whatever you want to call it. And that's, I think that's worked for me for project preservation. It's what I'm going to approach with the next book. So that's how I tend to do mine.
Well, I think that's good because like I just think like I've seen so many people are like, I'm gonna do like 50,000 words and I don't know, like 60-page outline like this author. And I'm like that author has written like 30 books, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I think it's very different. And that's where I like the novellas because it allows me to still complete a story that's generally bigger than a short story. I have 3 novellas for my prequel trilogy for my Nathaniel Withers series, my urban fantasy, my marine turned monster hunter. This prequel trilogy is all about how he becomes a monster hunter, how he leaves his old life.
That sounds interesting. That one sounds interesting.
Yeah. And then he comes in, he's like the Captain America of my urban fantasy universe. I got a vampire huntress. I have a Valkyrie, who's just really cool. And I got another guy that I'm keeping in my back pocket.
That's it.
But there's the 4, right? And they're like it's going to be like eventually like you have each of their books, but then it'll be like an Avenger style series as well, where they'll get together and these huge calamities that they need everybody, and then there'll be like other characters and stuff, like kind of like Avengers Endgame, stuff like that. I just think that was a great way to do it. But you know, it's just it's like, but I'm planning each one where I can throw the novellas into an actual book. So I'm still getting used to, you know, writing a whole book. It's just easier because I'm just, you know, kind of just plotting it differently. But yeah, because it's like, I think it's just interesting to see because I like the novellas. I have another series. It's called Twin Flames. And I got this like Shadow Walker. And he's like a thief and he uses these shadow abilities. And then he's a little bit older, more experienced, meets a new war priest who's like younger, and their destinies are converged. And it's like a fantasy version of Mission Impossible. If that sounds cool to anybody. Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah, it's like and mixed with Lethal Weapon. Like that's like their style of buddy cop. It's like a buddy cop drama and it's set in a fantasy world with Mission Impossible like stakes. But it's like, you know, I think it's interesting because I like some of the smaller things because I just get used to completing a project, planning the next one, you know, and that started for me that one started as a Kindle Vella series I was planning, and now I'm putting them together as novellas. So instead of being every 3 episodes being like 10 to 15,000 words, I got 5 episodes being around 25 to 20, or, you know, novellas, 3 novellas being about 25 to 28,000 words each. So I think it's harder because it's like, you know, I think the better you get at things, right, the more you do it, the easier it is. So I've talked to a lot of authors who are like, oh, I do things way differently and plot way differently, or
everyone's got differently.
So yeah, and even the ones who think you got it down, I've talked to a lot of people that 3.5, like 3.5 novel to the 4th one, you know, a lot of things start to change. So it just ends up, you know, just kind of depends on where you're at in your career, I think, and in what genre and at what time, you know, what you end up doing. But I think that you brought up a good point, is like just kind of finding what works for you. I find if I write myself too much of an outline, I write myself into a corner And that's like when I teach, like I prep things ahead of time because I'm an organized person, but I guarantee you the next morning is when I'm going to have my best idea. So I wake up early to then fix it, and it always ends up working better. And I feel that's how it is with my outlining, is like I always come up with something better. So it just ends up that way. But
awesome.
But yeah, thank you so much for coming on, my friend. This has been absolutely awesome. I'm really excited to show people, mail and everything. So I'm really excited to read the book. I'll have that review a little bit after this, just in case people are wondering. I'm really behind on my life right now because of work, but I'm getting there, getting that caught up with the TBR mountain, as I like to call it. But I'm really looking forward to this one. I just want to remind our audience that, anywhere that you find DR's book, any product that we have for anybody, it helps everybody, right? Reviewing it, whether it's like you said, your cover artist, editor, and typographer, copy editor, anybody. So please make sure you guys are reviewing everybody's products and DR Holt's book. I want to just thank everybody again. Make sure you go to the description. You can find DR's social links, book links for project preservation. Everything's right there in case you're new. So please check those out. Again, DR, thank you so much for coming on. I am so excited to see where project preservation goes for you. And I'm really excited to hear about your next idea as well. So I hope that we can chat further in the future, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I've got to say, you have an amazing passion for books. You've made me want to start reading already. I don't know, I've been so stuck in project preservation that the passion that you've got for books has made me want to start reading some more fiction again. So you're definitely doing the right thing with this podcast. And thank you for responding to my email and having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, my friend, if you need any recommendations, just email me. I'll give you some great ones there, particularly for science fiction. I had some great ones last year that I was like just going like crazy on. But thank you so much again. If you need anything else in the future, just email me and I'll help you out as best I can.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk to you later, my friend. I hope you have a good rest of the day. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yep. See you.